Thanks so much for tuning in to all of the episodes of 52 Weeks of Why. We're into the halfway point of the 52 weeks at this point. And I think at some point I'll do an episode where I go back and revisit and re-articulate some of the things that I've learned from the people that I've interviewed. But I just want to thank everyone who's tuned in, who's been on this adventure with me. It's been really cool to hear what motivates people, to hear whether that has been their motivation their whole life, and how that changes their morning and evening and daily activity. My guest today, man, just in our brief conversation before we got recording, right up my alley in terms of what he's reading and what we were talking about. So the quote today kind of ties into what we were discussing before we hit the record button, and it has to do with the subconscious. And this comes from Think and Grow Rich. And I just want to share this quote very quickly. And it says that faith is a state of mind which may be induced or created by affirmation or repeated instructions to the subconscious mind through the principle of autosuggestion. Now, this book was written a long time ago, right? So the principle of autosuggestion isn't something that we hear about in 2020 very often, but he explains this a little bit. You can convince the subconscious mind that you believe you will receive what you asked for, and it will act on that belief, which your subconscious mind passes back to you in the form of faith, followed by definite plans for procuring that desire. Repetition of affirmation of orders to your subconscious mind is the only known method of voluntary development of emotion of faith. If you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you like to win but think you can't, it's almost certain that you won't. If you think you lose, you're lost. For in the world we find success begins with a few fellows. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win a prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later, the man who wins is the man who thinks he can. I've spent the last 4 or 5 years of my life reading and studying this concept of training my subconscious. And Steve Cross is my guest. Steve and I were talking about this. And before we dive in, Steve, I want to banter about this a little bit because it's really something I'm passionate about. And I talked about how I think everybody can relate to this idea that you have a question that's presented to you that you don't have an answer to right away. And you say, okay, let me sleep on that. And somehow, magically, you wake up the next day and you have the answer. And you haven't consciously thought about it at all. There's no repetition of thought in your head. You've just simply thrown it back into your subconscious, and you wake up with an answer to that. Steve, first, thanks for being here. And second, has that ever happened to you?
Often, quite often, actually. Yeah, it's every day. It's a part of your entrepreneur life that you kind of make time for priority decisions and things that can take less priority. You just throw them to the back of your mind. You don't consciously think about them. And the next day you have an answer for an employee or for a client that you might not have necessarily been consciously thinking about. Yeah,
so I help people with mortgages, and sometimes you face an obstacle with a particular client or file that you could beat your head against it for hours and never come up with the answer. But at 2 a.m., something clicks and you wake up and you're like, I've got it. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. And so what was interesting to me is I learned from reading Think and Grow Rich and Blink by Malcolm Gladwell and a couple of other books that this is something that you can do with intention, that you don't have to plant the seed and wait until the next morning to get the response. And there's been a lot of writing about this. The final poem that was in that quote that I read has a lot to do with thinking positively, and your outcome becomes what you repeat and what you repeatedly think about. We all know people who have won who weren't the fastest or the brightest or the best, right? And that kind of solidifies that philosophy. But Ryan Holiday, who's a modern writer and a Stoic, his most recent book is Stillness is the Key. And so in this thought of planting seeds in your subconscious, you have to also allow for opportunities of stillness to get the answer. And that's why most of us get it first thing in the morning after we wake up, or in the middle of the night while we're sleeping. So if you plant that seed and then you allow yourself to be disconnected for a few minutes even, and empty your mind, the same result happens. So you can plant the seed and get the answer in 10 or 15 minutes if you do it strategically, using the same tactic of planting the seed and waking up the next day. I haven't talked about this at all in the podcast yet. I'm surprised because I've read about this a lot. But Steve and I were talking about this, and I know he said that it's something that he practices. So are you also kind of, it's a very 2018 to 2020 thing on the positive bandwagon, right? Thinking positively.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always a supporter of positive vibes, positive thinking. I've been a firm believer in karma probably for the last 20 years of my life, most of my adulthood, and just always doing the right thing. Eventually, it will find its way back to you in the world.
Yeah, it's amazing how my life changed as well. I've always been a really good cynic. The naysayer voice in my head is hilarious and terrible at the same time, right? And I always thought that cynic voice in my head was hilarious and it made other people laugh, but my life wasn't good when I was listening to that voice or articulating what the voice said. Right. And it took a lot of training my mind to push that voice that I've now convinced myself isn't funny. That humor isn't really good humor. It gives us all a little chuckle when you hear that guy, but that's not the guy that we want to listen to all the time. It's not the lifestyle that we want to live. He should be back in a dark, dingy corner somewhere, not in the forefront of your mind. So Steve, it's really cool to hear some of your story before we started recording. And I want to talk about family first. It's always where I begin. So married for 8 years. And I'm just so amazed that you have 4 boys, yep, ranging from college to preschool.
You bet. The marathon.
I can't even wrap my mind around that with, an 8, a 6, and a 3-year-old. I'm in the lower echelons of where you are, right? So you've got 2 that are in that zone, but you're also dealing with a teenager and a college student. So the financial outflow that's coming from the teenager and the college student paired with the emotional outflow of the toddler and the elementary student, that's pretty awesome. I didn't ask their names. What are the boys' names?
We got Quentin, Xathan, Sullivan, and Jacoby.
The youngest is 4?
Correct. Yep. Oldest is 18. Quentin, he's at YSU, a freshman this year. And Xathan, he's a senior at Columbiana. And then Sullivan is first grade in Poland. So then Jacoby's preschool. So last year when COVID hit, we dealt with losing Quentin's at the end of his senior year and not knowing what was going on. It was no big deal to Xathan at the time because he was only a junior and everybody was like, it'll come and go. And then as we moved forward, trying to do college visits and doing that stuff, Xathan missed out of all of his recruiting for football over the summer because every camp was closed. NCAA shut down recruiting. And now it came full circle because now Xathan didn't know if he was going to go back to school for his senior year, if it was going to be remote, if he was going to have a football season. And then Quentin going into YSU, it's no big deal because YSU, he only has, I think 2 remote classes. The rest of his classes are still live in person. So it really hasn't affected him going into college all that much. So Yeah, so we get get it from every angle. My wife is a volleyball coach, so she also coaches the sports team right now through all this coronavirus and everything. So it's just it's part of our daily lives.
I have a good friend whose daughter I'd become friends with, was a senior last year, and had played lacrosse, heavily involved in lacrosse up in the Akron Stowe area. And, lacrosse is a later in the school year sport. And they had built up to this team that this was their senior year. It was the year they were going to finals. They had all of these big plans for the team, and they never got to play. They didn't get to play a game. It's not only is it's difficult, because when I was a teenager, I swore I would never forget a couple of key things about being a teenager. And one of them was the intensity of emotion. I felt like my parents were always telling me, oh, you'll get over it. Oh, it's no big deal. It's not as big of a deal as you think it is. And I just hated that my feelings were always made to be not what I felt like. Yeah, so I completely relate to that. Now, you've been married to your wife for 8 years.
Yep.
And currently an entrepreneur, born and raised in Ohio.
Correct.
Lived down by me went to Crestview down in Columbiana,
yep.
And now you're in Poland, right?
Grew up a hillbilly, and now I'm a transplant in Poland.
Nice. And so the company that you run, I'm going to assume, we haven't talked about it, but I'm going to assume that the entrepreneurial spirit and what you do for a living probably correlates pretty well to your why. But tell us a little bit about iSynergy, what it does, and how long have you been involved with it?
Yep. iSynergy, I founded it in 2011. Digital marketing agency. We do pretty much everything on the internet. Create websites, do the digital marketing, social stuff, SEO, search engine optimization. And basically, people come to us with goals and targets for their advertising, and we execute on them.
You and I talked a little bit about this prior to segueing into being an entrepreneur and being involved in iSynergy. You were not an entrepreneur, and you had a job leading into the foreclosure crisis, which was solid, salaried. Yep. Met your wife, got engaged, and came home and
said, "Honey, I quit my job." Yeah, that's what happened. I'm not even sure if we were engaged yet. I think we still might have been just dating. So yeah, I left a six-figure job, came home, said, I'm done with that. We're gonna start an agency. And as the story goes, I kind of tell it that, I just got fed up with corporate America, middle management, the layers of the hierarchy. It was killing my spirit as a human, and just as a person. Growing up, you start your why with, hey, I want to make a lot of money. I want to achieve these certain goals. Then when you grow up and you mature and your goals mature and you figure out your real why, that money at that time was not as important as, I was over in Pittsburgh. So I was leaving at 5 a.m. I was getting home about 7 p.m. I was divorced at the time. So my two older boys, I was missing out on a ton of time with them that I had. So it just wasn't worth it for me. It was just multiple reasons just to say you're done with it, and it wasn't worth it. So yeah, that's how that came to be.
And this was, over a decade ago, and she stayed with you despite quitting your job. Yeah. And yeah. She
how smart is she, right?
Yeah. I jokingly say, right, so I've been with my wife since 2001. We didn't get married. We got married in 2009, right after the foreclosure crisis, in the midst of it, pretty much, right? And I was in the mortgage industry at that point, and I figured if she could be with me through those times, we could make it through just about anything, right? And same thing, like your son went through a really challenging time last year. If he could make it through that, right, just about anything. And relationship-wise, if we could do this with our wives and make it, then we know our relationship can make it through just about anything, right?
That's the exact same philosophy I had with the business. I figured if I could start a business and make it through that, I can make it through anything.
Yep. Awesome. All right, Steve, thanks again for your time and for sharing the story. I thought it was really interesting and good to segue and lead up into your why. So please share with us your why.
My why is just to help. I get, full gratification and fulfillment in my life by helping others achieve their dreams. That's it. That's when I started the agency. Our niche, and we still have a niche, is with startups. And we're not talking about VC startups on the West Coast, with millions of backing. This is somebody that has an idea. They may have a couple of grand, and hey, how do I move forward? I don't even know what to do with this. And just watching and working with those people, the passion and the motivation that they have of wanting to achieve something or wanting to create something, a legacy, wanting to achieve, financial freedom, where sometimes it's just ego driven. They just want to be known as that entrepreneur or that success story. Getting to help those people. Also, as we've graduated larger in the agency, and it's not just myself, that why still holds true, and it goes right through with the agency. Everyone here knows that our goal here is to help others achieve their goal. That's exactly what it is. Whether we're dealing with a marketing manager that has a whole marketing staff and their budget is 7 figures, or I'm talking to a mortgage broker or an insurance company where it's just a mom and pop shop and they have a couple people that work part-time. They're still trying to achieve their goals. They're still trying to put food on their table, different levels, but they come to us and they have trust in us to help them achieve those goals. And that's what we do. That's what it comes down to.
Do you think that helping other people achieve their goals has been your why since you were a teenager?
I'm not sure. I haven't retrospectively looked back at it upon that. It definitely consciously was not. As most teenage boys, I was very self-centered. Hey, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. My why back then, I have thought about this a little bit. It was to push the boundary and to do something. My goal was always to do something that somebody else had never done before. I've always thought outside the box, pushed the envelope, questioned everything. And that's what I base my agency on, is ask why, question everything. So, that's it. I think there's a tie in there somewhere. I'm not sure where it is, but I think there is a tie in there, though.
Was there a point where someone entered your life and helped you realize a goal that pushed you into wanting this to be your why?
Absolutely. It was my wife. Figuring out what my why was and having the confidence to attack it, for sure. She's always been, it's that old saying, behind every great man is a great woman, but it's absolutely true. You need that person, and you need to have that person with you to tell you, at the end of the day, when you're beat up and you're defeated, to tell you, when you don't have that inner dialogue anymore, telling you, nope, tomorrow's going to be better. And you start questioning yourself and everything. You need that person to say, you know what, I believe in you. Tomorrow's going to be better. And you're like, are you sure about that? Are you crazy? Because then you start questioning their sanity. It without a doubt, 100%, it was my wife. That relationship, that healthy relationship of codependency, helping each other, propping each other up, always being each other's biggest supporter, for sure.
I think it's cool that you've articulated that way, because it's that voice of the naysayer, right? Just gets louder and louder. And sometimes we forget that voice isn't us. And we let the voice overtake us and we start believing it, right? And whether you're religious or not, or what you believe or not, that voice is a liar. And that voice comes to us trying to trick us and trying to drag us down. And if you don't have that person, when at the moment you need it to lift you back up and to help push you back up, you can really get down into a pretty low place in your life, mentally and emotionally. I've experienced that because I didn't have that, and you're right, to have that person help lift you up. So you came out of your youth and out of a good salaried job and met your wife and had the inclination that you wanted to start iSynergy and wanted to start helping other people realize their goals and achieve their goals. Is there a point where you can hang your hat and say, I've done it, my why is complete, I'm successful, and I can move on now? Or is it something that is forever going?
It'll be forever going, without a doubt. There's no quantifiable, finish line for me. It's always about knowing that there's other people out there that we can help in creative, strategic ways. And as long as we're always doing the right thing, people are always going to have a need and want us to help them. Whenever I started the agency, it was always a long-term play. It wasn't, especially in Youngstown, Ohio. You do things the wrong way and you try to get in, get people, you're not going to be around very long. It's not like a major market where you can probably do that for 20 years in Chicago and you fly under the radar, trick some people. But in Youngstown, Ohio, you do that for a year or two, you're out. Yeah, you're out the door. So it's always been a long-term play for us. And just, I get asked often, what is the long-term goal? Because some agencies and some businesses, and it's one of the questions I initially asked a client on like onboarding, what's the goal here? Are you trying to build up and get, revenue? Is it acquire users? Are you just trying to get larger so that way you can get acquired? Are you trying to cash out? And my long-term goal, it's odd because I always hold clients to that question and put their feet to the fire. But if somebody asks me, I don't have an answer. It's just to do good things and, give people the people here that I work with a good work environment. And that's about it. I just enjoy doing what I'm doing, and I don't have to work at a factory, and I can't stand monotony. I just have to, every single day has to be different.
When you are getting started with the day, I'm in a similar position with you with kids in my life, and the morning routine's a little different with a 3, 4, 5-year-old than it is with kids in school and kids in college and no kids. So how does the goal, or does your why of helping others realize their goal, is that a part of a morning routine for you?
Absolutely. It used to be a little bit different, obviously before the second round of kids came through. I used to hit the gym in the morning at 5:30 a.m. Don't do that anymore. My why of helping people, the very first thing I do is I think of, I try to plan out my day the night beforehand. And when I wake up in the morning, my morning routine is basically my time. I get up before anybody else in the house. I try, I have my coffee or tea, I get my shower, I get ready for the day, and I'm just mentally preparing for what that day is going to bring. And I think that's how I get ready. I don't have any certain process. I have a few rules for myself in the morning. Like I don't look at my phone other than I check the weather for about 10 seconds, and that's about it for the first 45 minutes to 60 minutes that I'm awake. I don't look at anything digitally. I think it's been proven that it kind of ruins your day and offsets your mind for the day as well if you jump on a digital device too soon. So I take that, I try making it 45 minutes to an hour and just experience the day, experience the morning, and mentally get ready for meetings or client meetings, internal meetings, and my tasks that I have to do. And, it's just like a sport. You do your mental reps for a sport. So that way, when it's time to execute, you're ready to go. And basically, that's what I do take for my morning. And then, when everyone wakes up, it's that controlled chaos of our house that takes over. And you just hope the habits of the mental reps take over when it's time to execute.
There's something to be said for being up before the chaos of the house begins, especially with kids, right? If the first thing that wakes you up is the 3 or 4-year-old next to your bed, it's go time right now. And there's no catching up mentally to where you are now. right? Whereas if you're up before that, you have time to get yourself centered, to get your anchor firmly placed, so that if there's tantrums over socks or shoes, or if there's arguments over brushing teeth or which clothes to wear, you're in a little bit better of a mental place when you're facing those than if you wake up and it's go time right away. Wake up, go time right away, you are reactive. You are not in control. You're not responding where you're articulating and thinking about what you're saying and doing. You're reacting to the stimulus, and kids, they thrive on that. They get you into reaction mode, buddy. It'll happen the entire time until you regain control and begin to respond. I had Andy Andrews on the podcast, who is an outstanding author, and when he was going through a life transition, was told to start reading biographies. And so one thing that he brought up about this morning routine that continues to stick with me is all of the most successful and influential people in our history, they all have one thing in common, and that's they woke up very early. And he said that they seem to accomplish extraordinary things with the same time, the same lifespan as everyone else. And his theory is that it's because they had those morning hours where they could really get to it and do work. And there's something to be said for having that time in the morning, not being impacted by digital media or by your phone, not being reactive to other things that are waking you up, right? But waking up and being in control of your morning, and then being in control of your day. Really, really powerful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Any final thoughts? I know that you, within your company, talk about the why, and I found that to be very interesting. There's not a lot of companies and people that do that. So before we wrap up, any final thoughts relating to that, or anything we didn't hit on?
Doing it for a business is much more difficult. Because when you're doing it for yourself, you're peeling back your own layers, you're peeling back your own subconscious. When you're doing it in a business, even a small business like mine, you have multiple personalities. Hopefully you have some diversity in your office, and everybody has an opinion, obviously. So getting everybody on board with that, I thought would be a couple, 2-3 month process. And, that's more like an 8 to 12 month process of doing it. But it's a great exercise to do. We went through it a little bit, and we actually just onboarded a client last week who had they didn't call it their why, but it was like I forget what they call it, but it was from a Harvard study about defining, an internal doc, not a mission statement, not a company values, but just an internal doc about what their brand means and what their goal is internally and their voice. And it took them about 12 months as well. So it was pretty interesting to hear that. And they're a much larger, a few hundred employees, that the CEO went and categorized some employees, brought them in, and just did the entire process. So, but all in all, it made us much better of communicating and understanding of our daily decisions and how we handle things internally with clients and internally. Made everyone's lives much smoother.
Yeah, I was going to ask why you felt that was important to do. I think you answered it, right? It becomes your true north on your compass. It becomes the thing that you weigh all decisions that you need to make against. And now some of these decisions don't have to be thought in depth about because they don't fit with the why. And you are able to say, this is not something that we're involved in or want to be involved in because it's not on the same trajectory that we find ourselves on.
It actually removes a lot of communication, because instead of getting questions about, well, how do I handle this? Or what do you want to do about this? It's already been explained. It's already been addressed through our why, what we do and how we do it. That's your answer. And that's pretty often after when we finished up, that was my answer to employees. Well, what do you think? what we just did, this exercise, what do you think that means to you in this situation? And then people, started doing their own critical thinking and applying it to their daily tasks and lives and client relationships. And, it just removed a lot of that doubt and communication.
What a great place to finish. You summed it up perfectly, my friend. Thanks so much for taking the time. Thanks for going through the journey of kids and school and being an entrepreneur, and now talking a little bit about how COVID has impacted your life and your teenager. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
You bet. Pleasure to be on. Appreciate it.